Have you ever had a hunt that started out just kind of tough, and then only got worse from there? Through no fault of your own, the conditions and circumstances were just lined up against you perfectly. So much so that the hunt starts to slide from, just kind of an uncomfortable outing into an actual survival situation. Tyler Freel, Outdoor Life staff writer, a longtime Dall sheep hunter, and Fairbanks resident, had a hunt just like this last year. I'm Editor-in-Chief Alex Robinson, and today I'm talking to Tyler about how this sheep hunt with his buddy Frank left him stranded and very, very hungry for days on end. Hey Tyler, how you doing?
Pretty good, man. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. I want to talk to you about your sheep hunt from last year. So let's start here. I think that there's this idea that a lot of people have who have never really gotten to go on a sheep hunt or gotten to go on a goat hunt, that like the whole experience is this, really cool, like mountain hunting, alpine environment. And I think everyone understands that these type of hunts are physically challenging. But I think that most people probably don't understand that there's a whole element of a sheep hunt that is really all about just getting into the mountains. And sometimes that can be one of the hardest parts of the entire hunt. So, with that in mind, kind of take me back to your sheep hunt last year and what it took to actually get into the mountains to the point where you could start hunting.
Yeah, well, and that's a huge thing with sheep hunting in particular, and goat hunting too. A lot of these mountain hunts, just getting to where you start hunting is often a huge challenge. I would say on average, I'll spend anywhere from usually a day to a day and a half getting to where I'm going to start looking for sheep or start hunting. There's mountain ranges where you're not dealing with brush or trees. Some of them you're just dealing with bushwhacking for miles and miles. And spot we hunted last year, we got dropped off and it was between 5 and 7 miles. I don't know exactly, but the only spot we could get dropped off was down in the low country. You're in timber and brush and alders and muskeg, tundra, like you don't have solid ground to walk on. It's the kind of stuff where every step you're fighting something. It was just exhausting. Every step. It was several hours by the time we made it to where we ended up needed to camp. I mean, I was out of gas. My hamstrings were cramping up from picking up my knees and thrashing through brush, and it was just, you eventually hit a point where you just have to stop, and that's where camp ends up being, and you start looking around for the flattest spot you can find.
Yeah. Okay, so it's you and your buddy Frank, and you fight the brush all the way up to the spot where you're going to camp, and then the next day you actually get to start hunting, right? So how does your hunt go? How does your Dall sheep hunt go from there?
Well, we'd spotted rams on the way in. We're kind of out of these mountains. We spotted them way back up in the mountains the day before, and they were several miles away. We could just tell that they were rams, and from where we camped, we had to make a pretty steep climb to get up out of the brush and out of, up into the, what you'd call the alpine. And it didn't take us that long. We were fairly close, but, it was like 1,000-foot climb or more straight up. And almost as soon as we crested over, we saw these rams kind of on a different ridge line, not very far away, maybe 3/4 of a mile away. And at that, even under a mile, I try to be very careful about not letting them see us. And we found a nice hidden sheltered spot in some alders to set up our tent. And the weather started moving in, but we kind of worked our way up the ridge line and wanted to get a good look to evaluate these sheep. And they were about 1,000 yards away by the time we were glassing them. Just basically sat there looking at them in the rain. The wind was blowing the wrong direction to make any sort of stalk on them. And it was late in the day, so sometimes it kind of, you balance how effective making a move right now would be with just patience. I found that over the years, just being patient, sometimes if a situation's not right, usually the sheep will mess up. They'll put themselves in a spot that you can get close to them without too much problem. So we just watched them that first night, and the next day found the rams again, and we just spent all day watching them because we could not the wind was wrong, and we could not get into a position to get closer to them without them seeing or smelling us. So the next day we went to try to find them again, and they had crossed to an entire drainage and were on top of a ridge like 3 miles away. For whatever reason, they just did. And we saw some other rams that day, one nice ram, and it was one of the end of the day. You see him for 30 seconds from 4 miles away, and you think, it's a ram that we could tell was worth a closer look. So we were going to go after him the next day and get up the next day, and you can't see anything, and it's blowing 40 to 50 miles an hour. Just really, really bad weather. And that's the overall theme of this whole trip is bad weather.
And you're talking about weather, like it's just rain and clouds. Is that pretty much it? Like the mountains are like socked in and you can't see and it's raining? Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much rain and wind and clouds. And we're not above hunting in the rain, but when you can't see 100 yards, the key to finding and hunting these sheep is being able to see them. So all in all, we had, I think, 3 days out of the 6 hunting days we had that we could even get out of the tent. And the other day that we could get out of the tent, we found those rams again and made a stalk on them, and they had bedded in these rocks, and I don't know if they smelled us or just we had to approach them out of sight and basically wait for them to feed back out of these rocks, and we never saw them again. It was the very last day we could hunt, and we were scheduled to get picked up the next day. And so, it's like, what can we do but go back and leave empty-handed, which is the first time my buddy Frank and I have got skunked.
This isn't like your third sheep hunt, right? Like you've been doing this for many years. You've had a lot of successful seasons stacked up on top of each other. Yeah,
I think this was the 18th year in a row that I've hunted sheep, and I've killed 14 myself. And my buddy Frank's killed 7 or 8, and we've been hunting together since 2014, so almost 10 years that we've been hunting together, and we always do pretty well. And you just chalk it up to circumstance, So if we had a little bit more time or a little bit better weather, or the sheep did this instead of that, it would have been different. But it's kind of what makes it fun. You can't. It's frustrating, but there's things you can't control, and that's the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah. So you guys get your asses kicked by the weather up there, have to pack down. At this point, I'm guessing you're like, let's just get home. Let's get off the mountain. And you got to hike back to the spot where the bush plane's going to pick you up. Is that the deal?
Yeah. Yeah. We woke up that morning and the weather this past season was really bad, just storms all over the state. And, we're like, what are the chances, they're going to be able to come get us? The day we hiked out was nice. And it's like, man, we should just go try to kill a sheep or something. In hindsight, maybe that would have been the best thing. But, it's like the plane's supposed to come today. You got to be there. So, it took us several hours. We just, tucked our tails between our legs and hiked back out. And we didn't stop a single time. The bugs down in the low country were worse than they normally are that time of year. It felt like sitting on a bear bait in June. It was just almost unbearable. The mosquitoes and these biting gnats we call no-see-ums. It's just a cloud of them that's following you. And it's so annoying. We had one little, container of 100% DEET between us, but even that, it only does so much.
Yeah, okay. So you're ready to be picked up, I assume. But that doesn't work out. So no. Why does the plane not come to pick you up?
The plane didn't come to pick us up because it was totally socked in where they were leaving from, no visibility. And also, there was a lot of active weather between us and them, even though it started raining that later that evening. But we knew we needed to set the tent up just to get away from the bugs. So it took us a while to find a spot big enough to set a 2-man tent up. That's how thick the brush and trees and stuff are. Finally, we get that done and just pop the inner tent up, and they're just sitting there inside the liner. Just
so people can imagine, right? Like, this isn't a big tent, right? Like, it's a small, mountain tent. So it's like 2 guys just sitting in there, swarms of mosquitoes and black flies surrounding them after having hunted for 6 days, not killing a sheep. And you're just sitting in there, I guess, quietly?
Yeah, pretty much, and obviously waiting for updates, because we take those inReach devices. It's just kind of dumb not to have some form of communication when you can. And, eventually it was like, weather's still bad here. So we just wait. And then it became pretty apparent that no one was coming that day. And we start going through our food, and we planned for 8 days total, a day to hike in, a day to hike out, and 6 days of hunting. I mean, we almost always kill a sheep, and I almost always end up with extra food at the end of the trip. So I didn't skimp, but I only took what I needed for that 8 days. And when we got back, Frank had a homemade turkey dinner, dehydrated type meal in a vac seal bag, and he had 2 granola bars. And we had whatever's left at the end of the hunt that you're like kind of not eating because it's the less desirable stuff. I had some coffee singles and some liquid IV, like electrolyte stuff, and I had a couple partial little zip baggie, sandwich baggies of some different trail mix. And I found I still had like 2 or 3 little pieces of jerky. And I think that was all I had. And we were joking about rationing, and, there was a pair of swans on a pond that was pretty close by that we could hear and see. And, we're joking, that's our emergency stash or emergency supply, and just joking about it. And there was a lot of stuff really going on because, at some point that first afternoon, the first bear comes by the tent, and we didn't see that one, but we could hear it. Probably have to be dealing with bears at some point. And, it was just, we weren't worried or anything though. It's not abnormal to get delayed a day or 2 or sometimes 3, In the old days, you didn't have any communication and you just had to wait there. I mean, I've got a buddy that their sat phone broke and then the transporter forgot about them, and they were there 3 days beyond their 10 days, I think, before they finally remembered, oh, hey, yeah, we need to go. People were getting worried about them.
For the most part, these aren't like outfitters or hunting guides, right? Like this is more or less like you're just hiring an Uber to take you into the backcountry and pick you back up, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And there's a pretty extensive network of transporters, they're called, which they don't guide you or anything. They just get you from A to B, and different transporters will have different areas that they operate out of. But yeah, it's basically just a bush plane ride out into the backcountry. Some people get pretty wound up about being weather delayed, and if it's not something you're used to, it's understandable because people just can't fathom. Well, why can't I'm scheduled to get picked up today or scheduled to fly out today? Why can't they do it? And all these companies that fly these little bush planes operate on VFR, which is like, visual flight. They can't do instrument flight. You have to be able to see to be able to fly, and it's for good reason. I mean, there's nothing that'll appreciate your mortality like jumping in a Super Cub or some of these little planes, and sometimes you're getting tossed around, and sometimes you're flying really long distances. And just because it's sunny here and sunny there doesn't mean there isn't a huge impassable storm somewhere else.
There's a lot of kind of like stories and lore around like the dangers of bush planes and flying, into the backcountry in bush planes. But those stories, for the most part, seem pretty warranted. Like, it's not like stepping into like a big passenger plane, like a Delta flight that has all of the, advanced radar, and has the route pre-programmed, and the pilot basically just has to make sure that the instruments work. Like, these guys are actually navigating and flying the plane themselves.
Oh yeah. No, and usually, and a lot of times you're sitting right next to them. It's nowadays they all have GPS and good instrumentation, but it's still not safe to fly if you can't see. Even on clear days, sometimes you'll hit a downdraft and you feel it, push the plane down, but you don't really realize what's happening until you look up and the pilot's cell phone is hanging in midair above the dash. It's a totally different ballgame than on big planes. Yeah,
and my kind of other understanding is there's not like a lot of negotiation that really goes on after the plan is set. Like, when they say that they're going to pick you up at a certain spot and a certain time, like, you have to be there. Like, it's not like, well, maybe we'll like text them and they can come and get us a little bit later. There's almost like an ethical code of like being ready when the plane comes to get you.
Yeah, for sure. And like there's been times where I've been done and got pulled out early, and they're happy to pull you out early if they have the time to come get you. But typically, no, that would be poor form to just say, oh, yeah, well, I'm going to be 2 days late. Come get me later. Maybe it'll work, but it's not something you want to demand on their part, because then they'll still come get you, but it's going to be on their time.
Yeah. All right. So you guys are just kind of hanging out now. You got a little food left, but it's not that big of a deal. Got some bears around camp, which, you're used to. That's part of hunting in Alaska. What kind of happens from there? What happens in the next, day and a half?
It was way more stressful than you would think it would be. You'd think, all right, I don't have to go back home quite yet. I can just sit here and chill and recover. And different people handle it differently. It was pretty stressful. You're talking to your family back home and they're worried and not knowing. And it was stressful. You watch whatever movie you have on your phone over and over and over again and try to, also conserve batteries, because you don't know. It may be abnormal to be delayed more than a couple days, but there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to get picked up within a week or 2 weeks. There's that little bit of uncertainty in the back of your mind, and you start thinking, all right, well, what steps do I need to take? When do I need to take them? It's still almost unbearable. The first couple days, it was unbearable to get out of the tent with as bad as the bugs were. You just get out and did your business and hurried back up before you got eaten alive. I think that second day, it was 2 or 3 times we had bears come by the tent, and they weren't really being mischievous or anything. I think we were just kind of on a path, and they're, of course, going to come check out whatever it is. But you have to run them off, and then we start joking about shooting bears. It starts getting a little more serious as far as the food goes, because we split the dinner the first night, and we're just slowly nibbling away at the little food we had left. It starts to get uncomfortable, and you're stir crazy, and just all this uncertainty that's boiling around. And it just gradually took a little bit more serious of a tone.
We'll be right back after the break.
I think the point that's important to highlight is that, like, this is at the end of a pretty hard mountain hunt, right? So it's like you'd already kind of tapped into a lot of your reserves just for the hunt itself. Just being up in the mountains, fighting the brush, doing all the hiking and glassing that you got to do in the weather. Like, that takes a lot of energy. And then toward the end of it, now you just don't have anything to eat.
Yep. Typically sheep hunting, you're burning more calories than you can eat, and your body does weird things. I just don't get as hungry as I feel like I should be a lot of times sheep hunting. I have to force myself to eat, and I don't know, that may just be my body, but you come off of that and you're spent. You're needing the rest, but also calories to kind of help your body recuperate. Even without food, it's not like we were going to starve to death, but it was turning into kind of a serious, like, we need to eat something situation.
2.5 days without actually eating?
We ate a little bit on the day we hiked out. We had breakfast. I think I ate my last breakfast, and we split that dinner. We didn't really eat anything during the day. I maybe had 500 calories worth of stuff for 3 days, basically.
Yeah. That is hard, I think, for most people to comprehend. Like, it doesn't sound that long, right? Because people can go for weeks without eating and survive. So it doesn't sound that long in terms of, like, survival. But if you think on just like a normal day where you're really active and then not eating that night, and then the next day maybe just eating like a granola bar, like, that is, I don't think a ton of people know exactly what that feels like.
I didn't.
Yeah. So, like, what does it actually feel like? What does it feel like to go like 2.5 days without really eating any food?
It's weird, man. And it was, like you said, it's not like it was imminently life-threatening or anything, but, we're used to having food whenever we want it. or need it, even if you're on a diet, you're still eating stuff. There's still food available. Yeah, it's like, it hurts a little bit, your stomach is, and it's just like, rah, 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 going nuts, telling you to feed it. But, yeah, just, it's stressful and harder to sleep. It seemed like even harder than normal on the ground for me, and I don't sleep really well. After a while, it kind of like scared me a little bit is you quit feeling hungry. Like I was hungry in the sense that I was aware I needed to eat and like food sounded so good, but it wasn't just that hangry type of feeling, like I was hangry for a while and then I quit feeling hangry and was just tired.
Like the actual physical hunger morphed into something else.
Yeah. No, I was just really, really tired and I had a hard time thinking as clearly. You get dizzy. The end of the second day, we were pretty damn hungry, and Frank had actually gone. He's like, I got to get out of the tent for a minute. He gathered up a bunch of firewood and kindling and stuff.
So Frank's ready.
He's in kill mode, and we had seen one of these bears, and we're pretty sure they were all black bears. So, we decided the next bear that poked its head around the tent was going to get shot. And the morning of the third morning, I was kind of half awake, half asleep, trying to fall back asleep so I could ignore escape the present situation sort of. But, heard something and kind of woke me up a little bit, and I started paying attention to it. And then, snap right next to the tent, and I'm like, yep, that's a bear. I drew my pistol, ripped open the tent, and there's two bears standing there, like right off the end of the tent. And I'm like, shit. I could tell it was a sow and a cub. It wasn't technically a cub, but like a year and a half old bear that's still with the sow. And sow runs off immediately, and the younger bear stays there, which, especially in that situation, season was open. There was no legality issues with shooting that bear. And ethically, I didn't have a problem with it under those circumstances at all. I didn't ethically have a problem with killing both of them. But I knew, the sow had run off, and I could hear her out in the brush, and that the younger bear stayed there and kind of was circling the tent. And I kept going back and forth, and I was ready to just shoot him right in the forehead with my 10 millimeter and cut the back straps out of him and have something to eat. But I knew that sow wasn't going to just leave if I killed that one. And we had a rifle with us, but we couldn't see anything. It just wasn't a good situation to have, and I knew we would end up having to kill both bears
because you couldn't see because the brush around you was so thick.
Yeah, the brush was so thick, that she wasn't going to leave, and we would end up having to kill her one way or another, and it probably would turn into a dicey situation. There was no way we'd be able to shoot her at a distance that was comfortable, so to speak, and. So I decided to run them off and just hoped I made the right decision, hoped that the plane was going to come that day. And a little while later, we got up and the bugs had subsided a little bit, and we went and picked some blueberries. And Frank was grazing, and I wanted a couple substantial, mouthfuls of them if I was going to go through this effort to pick them. So I picked, a whole coffee, filled my coffee cup up and ate them. And it was like almost an instant burst of energy, where I could feel it, like the energy from that food, but it didn't last long. And it just wasn't, it was a little bit of a help, but it wasn't enough to make any big difference. And it was weird. I found myself just walking around on this flat ground, getting super tired. Just you walk a few steps and get tired and out of breath. And I'm like, man, I should be in primo shape right now, but it's just not. And at that point, the swans had left the pond that was nearby, and there had been a loon on there, and we joked about shooting that. And at that point, we would have shot that and we had a plan to use one or both of our air mattresses to paddle out and get it if it wouldn't come to the shore. And that was gone. We couldn't even find a squirrel. It's not like an area that you could really do any sort of effective hunting. It's so thick, you're kind of just stumbling around into whatever you can find. It's obviously loons are a protected species. In a lot of areas, swans are too, and even in areas where you can hunt them, it wasn't open season yet, and you're not allowed to like shoot them with a rifle or anything. But in the state, when you're out of food in emergency situations, you can kill animals to eat. You know, there's protocol for reporting them and salvaging, you know, so it was like on the edge of being a survival, we need to kill something to eat situation.
Yeah, that's like what's so interesting, I think, about this is like you could be picked up at any time. And then if you were, like, if you'd shot the bear or shot the loon and then, like, a plane comes, like, an hour later, you're kind of like, oh, God, like, why do we do that? But on the flip side, you could be out there for another week and you didn't kill the bear. Then you're like, oh, God, why didn't we shoot that bear? We could be eating. So that's, to me, what is, like, you have to, at a certain point, you have to decide, like, okay, when are we actually in danger of not having enough food to like make smart decisions? And you were like, it seems like you were right up against that edge.
Yeah. Cause you know, as you go away, I noticed like a cognitive decline, just, you know, my ability to think clearly and be sharp and make good decisions. You know, I don't want to play it up, exaggerate it more than it was, but it was flirting with that line or type of experience. And it was interesting because I've never really been in that situation before. And there's plenty of people that have, you know, and have some pretty crazy survival stories, much crazier than this. It was just like an interesting experience. And you start thinking about things that you may, you know, seriously, that you may not have before. Like, how do I, you know, what's the balance of effort put in to get food versus resting, you know, kind of work to reward ratio, or am I better off just waiting for a bear? My buddy Frank's pretty blunt. He's like, we'll shoot one bear and we'll eat off that one. And when that starts to stink, we'll shoot whatever comes to investigate that one too and start eating that. But, you know, it's in some situations you just do what you got to do. Fortunately, we didn't have to. You know, we didn't have to deal with any of that. And we ended up getting picked up that evening. So that was, you know, it was good. But it was a crazy kind of educational experience.
Yeah, when you got back to civilization, did you just like go to McDonald's and eat a Big Mac? Like what did you do at that point after basically 3 days of hardly any food?
We came back into town, you know, my wife said, I knew she was making me dinner, and I had in-reached her, letting her know, you know, when the plane got there, I was like, I think we're going to be able to make it out. And we did. You know, it was a little suspect still, but we made it. And, you know, I left my truck at my buddy Frank's place, so we go over there, and his girlfriend had made us some barbecue sandwiches, and so I didn't want to be rude there, and I was starving, so I ate one of those. But it was weird. It took me, and I ate till I was full, you know, at home too. But it took me a couple days before I could really eat normally, you know.
Like, what do you mean?
Like, I'd get full really fast, and it just was like really interrupted my whole digestive system's routine. And that'll happen anyway when you're eating freeze-dried food and stuff like that. I'm not implying that I had some serious issues to sort out in the bathroom or anything, but
I'm almost sorry I asked.
No, but it was just weird. It took me a few days to where I would start feeling hungry at the normal times and whatnot, if that makes any sense.
No, that makes sense. Like, looking back, you're a year removed from this now, almost. Looking back on it all, like, do you have any takeaways or anything that people who are listening to this might be like, you should probably think about that if you go on a hunt like this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's any solid ones. Hindsight, it would have been nice to have left food where, you know, we're at our drop-off point, but we didn't, you know, according to our plan, that may not have been where we got picked up. And if we had left food there like we normally would leave food, it wouldn't be there because the bears would have ripped it to shreds. I mean, when we got back, we looked at the spot where we had kind of unloaded our gear and sat there and got our stuff all sorted out before we started hiking. And a black bear had like dug up all that ground, just scratched it all up, you know, just from the scent of whether it was some food we'd been eating or whatever, you know. Yeah, because unless we had left food in a steel drum cabled to a tree, it would not have been there when we got back. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like we handled it pretty well. I think just keeping calm and not not freaking out. And that's good general wisdom for some of these remote backcountry hunts anyway. You just have to understand that there's some things you can control and some things you can't, and do your best to be prepared to just wait it out sometimes, or, you deal with weather and it doesn't always take necessarily like a super complex set of skills or gear, but just the mentality of keeping your composure and making smart decisions. Think about, the things you come up with, like, is this going to be worth the effort it's going to take to do? Everything you do, kind of do a cost benefit analysis. It's like, because we haven't had food for a day, are we going to go crazy and go hiking all over the place trying to find, come up with something to eat when we're going to spend more energy hiking, doing all around just to find what we're after? Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is just like trying not to worry too much about the things you can't control and just focus on what you can.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And, like looking back at it now, it is, I don't know, not like an insignificant situation, because you were stuck and like you did have to, make some decisions, and ultimately it all turned out for the best, right? So
yeah,
in the end, like it could be easy to look at that and be like, oh, yep, like that's just like kind of that's just like part of hunting, and kind of shrug it off. But I think if you don't really, it's easy to say that, I guess is my point. It's easy to say like, yeah, that's just part of hunting in Alaska. Like, you might just be stuck there 3 more days without any food. But until you actually have to do that and just like sit in a tent with your buddy for 3 days with no food, while mosquitoes are the worst mosquitoes you could imagine are just buzzing around outside, the mental aspect of it, which is what you're talking about, I think is the most important part.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, it was stressful, but, I think our experience helped. You can stomp around about it all you want. There's nothing anybody's going to do. And I mean, Frank and I met each other working at a lodge, on a Fognak Island, and the weathered Kodiak area, like that's notorious for weather delays. And even sitting basically at a 5-star lodge with all the food you could ever eat, plenty of stuff to just do and hang out and relax. Like over the years, you've seen people just lose their minds because the plane can't come and get them, just ranting, oh, they don't feel like flying today, and they're, they're just being lazy and blah. It's like, well, no, it's because they don't want to have their pilots get killed. So the mental aspect's huge.
I got one more for you. Next time, how about 1 extra granola bar? Save a swan's life,
Yeah, save a swan's life. It might make a difference.
The Outdoor Life podcast is edited and produced by Senior Deputy Editor Natalie Krebs, and it's hosted by me, Editor-in-Chief Alex Robinson. The natural sound effects in this episode are from the National Park Service and freesound.org. Music for this episode is by Harrison Black, Zep Jameson, and Emerson Lee via APM Music.